Hi, my name's Danny Hopkins. I'm here at Britpart in Shropshire with this gorgeous beast, the Land Rover Defender. Now in 90 or 110 form, this vehicle was built between 1983 and 2016. That's a 33-year production run. And it's recognisable the world over. It's an icon, it's a legend. If you asked a child to draw a Land Rover, they'll probably draw something a bit like this. But because they were mainly used as working vehicles, they've had hard lives. And that means there's a specific set of things that you need to look for if you want to get into one. And to tell you a bit more about them, here's Martin.
So Defenders are tough as old boots, but there are still quite a few things to check when you're looking to buy one. The first thing is deciding which body style you want, because Defenders came in station wagons like this one, pickups, hard tops, and sometimes soft tops as well. Trim level wise, the earlier ones came in a base model, which included vinyl seats, wind-up windows, didn't even come with a radio. Later on, you got county trim, and then later on still, you got models like the XS and lots of special editions, so make sure you know what you're looking to buy. It's also very important to know what sort of a life the Land Rover you're looking at has had. Obviously, the station wagon models are more likely to have been used as family cars, so will have probably had an easier time than the pickup and hardtop variants. So to begin with, we're going to take a little look around the body and show you any points you need to check before you buy one. First of all, take a good look down the side of the vehicle and just check that the body lines are straight. Obviously, these are a body on chassis design, so if the vehicle's been in any accidents, there'll definitely be variations in how the panels fit with each other. That said, Defenders never were that straight from the factory anyway, but take that into consideration. Next up, have a look at the bulkhead. If there's been any repairs done on these top corners, normally you can feel a difference in the surface as the panels that are used to repair them fit over the top of the rot. If the repair's been done well, this will be completely flush all the way along. It's also a good idea to get a magnet and make sure that the bulkhead hasn't been repaired badly with filler. And that goes for down the door post as well. Water tends to rot beneath the lower hinge here, so make sure that's solid. And that's the same on the A and the B pillar on station wagon models, because that's a right pain to repair if it does rust out. One of the inherent flaws with Defenders is they use an aluminium panels, but they have steel frames behind them, and that's especially prevalent on the doors. So have a look down the skins of the doors and see if there's any paint bubbling or if the aluminium's starting to corrode, because once it's started to pit, it's a real pain to repair. You'll notice a lot of older Defenders have a lot of checker plate along the lower edges of the doors and on the sills, and that's generally from owners that have decided to just cover up the problem rather than fixing it, so beware of that. So make your way along the side of the vehicle, checking it all as you go. And once you get to the back, the first thing you want to check is the back door. Obviously, it has the spare wheel on it, so it's under quite a lot of load. As the vehicle goes off-road, it wears and fatigues the frame of the door, so make sure to open it and make sure it shuts smoothly and doesn't vibrate or shake about too much. And while you're here, have a look at the rear cross member. You might see visible rust from the outside of the rear cross member, but generally it will be up underneath and inside. So to thoroughly check the chassis over, we're going to head into the Britpart Workshop and get it up on the ramp. Right, so starting at the back of the vehicle, the first thing we're going to check is the rear cross member. It's really important to have a look all along the lower edge and up inside the channel of the rear cross member to make sure there's no rot. The vehicle we're looking at here is quite a late model, and it's easy to see how stingy Land Rover were with the rust proofing on these late ones, because it's just literally a covering of black paint, no underseal, no wax, nothing like that. So make sure everything's solid, give everything a good knock. You're looking for a nice metallic ring when you tap it with a screwdriver or a hammer. Any dullness indicates rot. If you're looking at an earlier vehicle, there's a real probability that it will have had a new cross member at some point in its life, so make sure the job has been done well, the welds are good and clean, and that it's been undersealed properly afterwards. Moving forward, looking at the chassis rails all the time, especially in the low areas like this where they can collect mud and water, you want to make sure that's solid, and in front of the back axle as well. On the axle itself, you'll notice this one has ABS fitted, so it has a wiring harness that runs along the back axle. Make sure that's in good condition and clipped in properly. Make sure it hasn't been caught off-road and snagged. Same with the brake pipe. Checking the condition of the exhaust all the way along. Aftermarket exhausts are of course available very readily, so don't worry too much if there's a bit of rust in the exhaust system. Make sure it's mounted solidly. Continuing along, check the state of the suspension, coil springs and dampers. Again, there's loads of options for these. You can check out one of the other Britpart Workshop videos to find out how to choose the best suspension for your Land Rover. But make sure the bushes are in good condition and that the springs aren't heavily corroded. Moving further forward, on TD5 and TDCI models, they have the fuel filter in the wheel arch on the right hand side. Make sure that hasn't been hit by anything off-road, there's no damage or leaks. That's really important to check. Further forward still, check the prop shaft joints, get hold of the prop shaft, twist it side to side and up and down to make sure there's no play in the differential pinion bearing and in the joint itself. Check for evidence of regular greasing. The grease nipples will often spit out a bit of grease when they're full, so if there's any splattering of grease around the prop shaft, don't worry too much. In fact, that's probably a good sign because it shows that the prop shafts have been greased regularly. Heading further forward, check the trailing arm brackets for damage and for corrosion around this area. On the earlier Defenders, this was a real hot spot on here, so make sure that's all solid. Nice metallic ringing noise when you give that a tap. This vehicle has side steps fitted. Again, make sure any accessories that are fitted to the Defender are good quality, that they've been fitted properly, and that they're not corroded because they're right in the firing line of all the dirt and mud that comes off the wheels as you go down the road. So make sure they're all nice and solid too. So as you work your way along the chassis, you also need to check the condition of the outriggers because again, they're right in the firing line of all the dirt and muck that comes off the road wheels and they commonly corrode. So make sure all the steel where they join to the chassis rail and to the body is all solid. On the station wagon and double cab models, they have this body cross member that bolts between the chassis and the body shell. This is again susceptible to rust, so make sure that's in good condition as it's quite a tricky job to replace. Moving further forward, again, checking the chassis rail all the time, up to the front outrigger. You have this piece of steel here that braces to the radius arm mount, and then the outrigger itself, which holds the bulkhead. You need to make sure all this steel is in good condition. Some of them will have been patched badly during their lifetime on older vehicles, but you can get repair sections to repair these, just cut them off the chassis and replace them completely, and those are available through Britpart. You want to be checking suspension bushes as you go. This has still got the original bushes fitted. If the vehicle's been fitted with aftermarket polyurethane bushes, you can expect a bit of a harder ride, but they will last a lot longer than the standard rubber ones. Moving further forward, checking for off-road damage if it looks like the vehicle's been used for green laning or off-roading. Check the gearbox cross member isn't bent or damaged. Make sure it's straight all the way across. Earlier vehicles had a tubular cross member which is easily dented. This one has the flat steel type. If the vehicle's fitted with anti-roll bars, make sure these are still in place. A lot of people remove these if they use the vehicle off-road a lot because they limit axle articulation. So if it has these chassis brackets, chances are it would have had anti-roll bars from the factory, so make sure they're still in place. While you're under here, you want to be checking for engine and gearbox oil leaks. Any major oil leaks should be investigated and fixed accordingly, but being a Land Rover, some light oil misting, a little bit of dirt here and there around the transmission is completely normal and nothing to worry about. If you've got excessive oil leaking from between the engine and the gearbox, you should suspect the crankshaft oil seal, which is a really big job to change because you need to remove the gearbox. Further forward, check that the steering, track rod and drag link are straight and haven't been knocked into anything off-road, because that will upset the tracking of the vehicle and you'll get uneven tyre wear. Further forward still, have a look at the swivel balls on the front axle. These shouldn't be leaking excessively. A little bit of weeping is normal, but if the metal looks like it's pitted or damaged, you need to budget for those because they will need to be replaced. And then right at the front, again, check the front axle casing for off-road damage because that's the first item that will come into contact with anything off-road, and that the steering box is dry, free of weeps, and that all the ball joints and the ball joint covers are in good condition, as they could be an MOT failure. Finally, check the chassis number that's stamped into the offside front outrigger of the chassis matches the VIN number on the logbook, the VIN number on the inside of the front windscreen, and the VIN number on the bulkhead mounted plate if it has that fitted. So when you're satisfied that everything underneath the Defender looks as it should, we can lower it down and have a look in the engine bay. So heading under the bonnet of the Defender, the age of the vehicle you're looking at will determine which engine greets you. The Defender had 5 different engines throughout its lifetime, starting with the 200 TDI, which was replaced by the 300 TDI. Then the TD5 came along in 1998, which ran till 2006, followed by the 2.4 TDCi engine, and then the 2.2 TDCi engine, which came in 2012 and ran all the way to the end of production. The first engine to be fitted to Defender was the 200 TDI, which is easily identifiable by its green oil filler cap and dipstick. These are really hardy 4-cylinder turbo diesel engines that only require regular oil and filter changes. The cam belts should be replaced every 5 or 6 years or 60,000 miles, whichever comes first. The only thing to look out for with a TDI is if it's been stood a long time, it's possible the oil valve stem seals will have gone hard and perished. So when you test drive the vehicle, have a look in the rearview mirror and check for any blue smoke, which would indicate oil being burnt. If you suspect the vehicle may have a head gasket issue, you will get white smoke from the exhaust and possible overpressurising of the cooling system and spitting water out of the header tank, so watch out for these as well. The engine that replaced the 200 TDI was the 300 TDI, easily identifiable by its yellow oil filler cap and dipstick. These engines are generally hardy units as well, but they did suffer from water leaks from the P gasket, which sits between the water pump housing and the engine block. If the coolant levels are allowed to get too low, the engines can suffer from head gasket failure, so make sure the coolant level's correct and check for staining around the front of the engine. Next came the TD5 engine, which is mechanically a very strong unit, but there are some elements of the fuel system you need to be aware of. First is the fuel pressure regulator, which sits at the back of the engine near the bulkhead. These can leak and cause diesel to run down the side of the engine and onto the ground, so make sure that isn't leaking. Secondly, when you turn on the ignition, listen to the electric fuel pump. If it takes a long time to prime, it's possible that air is entering the fuel system somewhere, and that can either be on top of the fuel filter housing or from the injector, copper washers or O-rings. Another way to check if these are faulty is to check the oil level. If the O-rings are split, it's possible that diesel can enter the sump, so if the oil level is high and it smells of diesel, you definitely need to budget for this. A bonus of the TD5 is that it has a timing chain instead of a cam belt, so there's no maintenance to do there. The engine responds very well to a remap, but make sure it's been done by a professional outfit and that it's been done to a high standard. If you've got poor starting or a misfire at idle or through the rev range, you should suspect the injector wiring harness, which leaks oil into the connector and can track all the way back to the ECU, which can cause running issues. So unplug the injector wiring harness and have a look inside the ECU as well. Replacement of the wiring harness has been covered in another video in the Britpart Workshop series, so be sure to check that out. The last engine to be fitted to the Defenders was the TDCi engine, which is a Ford unit. This was available in 2 different capacities, 2.4 and 2.2, which ran from 2012 to 2016. On the 2.4, it's worth checking the vacuum pump, which is mounted at the front of the engine, as these can leak oil excessively. So if there's any oil around the vacuum pump, suspect either the pump or the gasket has failed. 2.2 is quite robust as well, but they are very sensitive to overheating. So if the radiator is full of mud or any sort of debris from off-roading, the engine might go into limp home mode as you drive. The 2.2 is also the only Defender engine to be fitted with a diesel particulate filter, or DPF, and this can become clogged if the vehicle is only used for local driving and never gets up to any speed or does any hard work, so beware of this. A later vehicle fitted with the TDCi engine should have full service history, probably at a main dealer for the first few services, so make sure all the oil changes have been done on time. Now let's go for a drive and we'll tell you what to look for when you test drive a Defender. The interiors on Defenders are fairly basic, although the later models did get a lot of extra toys, including optional air conditioning and a heater that actually worked. So make sure all the vents work, make sure the heater blower motor works and that the temperature changes as it should do. It's very common to see Defenders with a lot of accessories and upgrades fitted, so make sure any wiring has been done to a very high standard. You don't want to see Scotch locks and twisted and taped wires everywhere. As you go down the road, make sure the vehicle tracks nice and straight. The steering wheel should be in the upright position as you go down a straight piece of road. As you brake, make sure the vehicle doesn't try and pull to one side or the other, as that could indicate worn suspension bushes. As you drive, you're listening for whirs and clonks and knocks from the transmission, so accelerate and then come off the accelerator and note how much backlash there is through the gearbox. If there are any whirs or whines, they will need to be investigated and fixed accordingly, so make sure you budget for this. The steering should be smooth and direct through the corners. The power steering should be consistent from lock to lock, and there shouldn't be any horrible whirring noises from the pump. As you drive the Defender, note how it handles bumps. If it feels like the steering's trying to snatch out of your hands as you ride over bumps, then they could be wearing the swivel bearings or joints. As you're driving, select a nice high gear and accelerate hard. Have a little look in the rear view mirror and see if there's any excessive smoke, and you'll be able to feel if the engine's misfiring through the rev range. A little bit of black smoke is normal, but if there's any blue or white smoke, then the engine could be burning oil or water, so make sure you take this into consideration. It's important to check that as you go through the gears, there aren't excessive clonking or whining noises. On the earlier gearboxes, first to second and second to third changes can be a little bit tight when the gearbox is cold, but this should clear up as soon as you get any heat in the oil. With the 6-speed units fitted to the TDCI Defenders, have a listen to the engine at idle. If there's any rattling noises from around the bell housing area, put your foot on the clutch. If the noise goes away, then the clutch plate has got loose springs and that will need to be replaced in the near future, so take that into consideration as well. It's also well worth making sure that diff lock and low range engage and disengage as they should. So push the lever all the way forward to engage low range, and then push it over to the left to engage diff lock. The orange warning light should come on the dashboard and then go off again as you bring it back over to the right. If you then pull the lever back down, you'll engage high range and you can continue your test drive. .200 TDI models had the LT77 gearbox, which is easily identifiable because reverse is away from you and up. These suffered from wear on the transfer box input gear, which eventually gave a complete lack of drive. Luckily, Britpart do an updated cross-drilled gear, which stops the oil starvation problem for good. On 300 TDIs, the R380 gearbox was introduced. This can be identified as reverses towards you and down. This gearbox ran on the 300 TDI and TD5 models before it was replaced with the 6-speed unit that came in with the early TDCIs. This is generally a hardy gearbox too, but if the vehicle's been used for heavy towing, there could be wear in the gearbox extension housing shaft. Again, upgrades are available to stop the oil starvation problem that kills these shafts, so it's well worth looking into those if you're looking to do towing with your TDCI Defender. So whether you're looking to buy one of the very first Defenders or one of the very last, the most important thing is to make sure the vehicle's enjoyed a relatively easy life. If you choose well, a Defender will look after you for years to come. That wraps up our buying guide of the Defender. Be sure to check out our other buyer's guides and other tutorials on how to look after your Land Rover with other videos in the Britpart Workshop series.